A lot of people in the art community are doing this wrong. Every time I try to research about blending modes, I always come across the same advice. Use multiply for shadows, use overlay for contrast, and to switch between the different blending modes until you find the one that works. I think this approach is very unintuitive, and it results in a lot of time wasted on finding the blend modes that work. If you want to improve your process and you want a strategy that can help you find the blend mode combinations to achieve that lighting effect that you're looking for, I think I have a solution for that. So let's get started. If you're used to what digital programs do, you know that most layers come with the default blending mode, which is the normal blending mode. This works by having the top layer obscure the bottom layer. Some common ones that you might know of are multiply, overlay, and color dodge. The easiest way to remember blending modes are to group them according to their functions. Photoshop has a very convenient list that groups the most common blending modes into normal, darken, lighten, inversion, and component groups. I'm not going to go through every single blend mode in this video. As a matter of fact, I'm not going to go into detail about how they work, but I can show you a strategy that I use to use the blending modes to get the lighting that you want. I'm going to demo with some Pinterest references for lighting. And to start off with, my example is going to be done with a portrait that I've painted, which is done with minimal shadows and diffuse lighting. This portrait layer is going to be referred to as the base layer. My strategy goes as follows. First, I look at the source of lighting. What kind of lighting is present in the reference material? And then I compare the reference against my base layer, and I determine what kind of changes are required. And 3, I experiment with the blend modes so that I can achieve the effects that I want based on the changes that I've determined. So with the first example, there's only one source of lighting. There is the spot lighting from the sunlight on the model's face. I compared that reference against my base layer, and I determined that the shadow of the reference is darker and more saturated than my base layer. I also note that the light areas, or where the sunlight hits her face, are yellow in hue and are lighter. Some of my favorite blending modes to use for darken are multiply, color burn, and linear burn. And some of my favorite lighten blend modes are screen, color dodge, and linear dodge, also known as add on Procreate. Just because I'm demoing this on Procreate doesn't mean that this is going to work differently on any other image editing software. Alright, on to step number 3. I experiment with the blend modes. First, I'm going to apply subtle shades in a darken layer, which is clipped onto the base layer, so that any changes that I make are limited to the portrait itself and does not affect outside of the portrait. Next, I experiment with the different blend modes in the darken group to see which one shows off the effect that I like the most. In this case, I use multiply because it does not apply extra contrast like linear burn or color burn does. Next, I use the hue saturation brightness adjustment to subtly change the effect once the blend mode is applied. Then once I have the effect that I like, I apply a layer mask onto the blend mode. A quick note on layer masks. This is a feature that controls the transparency of the layer that has the mask applied. In this case, the darken layer has the mask applied to it. White on the layer mask means that everything that the layer that has the mask applied onto it will show through. So white is 100% visible. And black is 100% transparent. In this case, I use the gray on most of the face, black to hide the portions in light, and white to show the darkest of the shadows. The beauty of using layer masks is that if you make a mistake on the placement of the shadows or the placement of the light areas, there is no paint over or erasing needed on either the blend layer or the base layer. This is simply to hide or reveal the sections that you want, and it gives you more control. I then apply the same step to the lighten layer. One note about using lighten layers is that if you use darker, less saturated colors in lighten blend modes, it will show up as a more natural effect. So I apply a darker shade in the blend layer, and then I experiment with my favorite blend modes in lighten. In this case, I chose linear dodge or add. And finally, I noticed that there are some subsurface scattering on the model's hair. So I apply another linear dodge layer on top to get those orange highlights. In example number 2, the reference shows two sources of lighting. First, the 3/4 frontal key light, and then the backlight, which almost acts as a hair light against a dark background. I'm going to use a similar strategy as before. In this case, I'm still going to use multiply as the shadow layer, and then I use a screen layer to show off the very light areas in the backlight. Once again, I use a layer mask to control how much of the shadow layers and the light layers are shown. Just an additional note, when you compare the skin tone of the base layer versus the skin tone of the Pinterest reference, you can see that the Pinterest reference model has a fairer skin because of the local chroma of her skin as well as the cool lighting that's being shown onto it. I've intentionally kept the blending layer structure very simple in this example, so that there's only 2 layers being applied. The multiply for shadows and the screen for the rim light. Looking back, I could have totally applied a 3rd layer so that I can show the quality of the light better. Another thing is that colors don't exist in isolation. So it's okay to drop in a color, apply the layer mask and the blending mode, and then using the hue, saturation, brightness sliders to adjust the colors so that you can see what it looks like with the blending modes applied in the final painting. In example number 3, this is a more complex reference where 3 sources of lighting are shown. There is the top-down lighting, there is the bottom-up blue light, and then there is the left pink light. When I went through the comparison between the reference and the base layer, I noticed that the base layer shows similar skin tone as what the reference shows when the skin is lit by the top-down lighting. So I decided to add shadows, and this time I used linear burn so that it can show off the blue hue in the shadows better. And then I used layer masks to subtly sculpt away the sections that are lit by light. I used the light and blend mode for the blue light, and then I used the linear dodge for the pink spotlight. Don't forget that you can use grays or any shade between white and black in the layer mask to control the value that you need in these lighting scenarios. I mentioned that the example that's used is complicated because of the different sources of lighting,
which can easily disrupt the value structure of the painting. You can see that I did a value check on the painting by applying a black fold layer set to the color blend mode. When I edit the layer mask with the secondary lighting, which is the bottom up blue lighting, I'm very cognizant of what it does to the value structure of the face. So I use darker shades of gray on the layer mask, just to make sure that effects that I apply are subtle and don't change the viewer's perception of the 3D structure of her face. I hope that this video was helpful, and I hope it solved your question of how to use blend modes more efficiently and effectively in the future. I actually have a real-time recording of this video where I go more in depth into the kind of decisions that I made during my painting process, and it's up on my Patreon. If you'd like, you can also watch me paint on Twitch, where I stream every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And I appreciate if you'd let me know what kind of video you'd like to see next. Thank you so much. I'll see you guys next time.